Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Caitlin Root. Sometimes, criminals who look for victims just for fun or out of a desire to kill. In the state of Missouri, USA, there is a town called St. Joseph. This is a small town with many parks, museums, and other attractions, as well as a large number of running tracks and walking paths in one of the parks called Krug. On Sunday, October 16, 2016, a man went out jogging. Closer to the end of the trail, the man noticed something suspicious on the path. Initially, he thought it was a mannequin because Halloween is coming soon. So, he calmly continued to run past it. When he reached the object, however, he noticed blood on it. At first, he simply ran past, but something alerted him and made him turn back. The mannequin suspiciously resembled the body of a girl. There was a hole in her chest. She was lying on the asphalt without clothes, in a pool of blood. The frightened witness called 911 for help. Even when he contacted the dispatcher, he was not sure whether it was a mannequin or not. This story unfolded in mid-October, 2 weeks before Halloween, when one could encounter various oddities. Perhaps it was a Halloween prank or some kind of decoration for the holiday. When the police arrived at the scene to investigate, they confirmed the witness's worst fears. It was indeed the body of a girl. The criminal did not even bother to hide the traces of his crime. Just a meter away, clothes were found, which had been neatly cut off. Additionally, the girl's false nails were scattered around the body, indicating that she had desperately resisted and that her nails had been damaged in the struggle. During their examination, forensic scientists were unable to find any identification documents for the girl. She had no personal belongings, means of communication, or the weapon used in the crime. To make initial conclusions, it was crucial to determine who the victim of this brutal massacre was. The only clue that could help the police was a T-shirt she wore. It had an inscription indicating that she was a student at Central High School, graduating in 2017. It was assumed she was a high school student preparing to receive her diploma the following year. The fingerprints of the victim were collected, but no matches were found in the national database. This was not surprising. Given the approximate age of the victim, it was unlikely she had a criminal record. The authorities were forced to close the park to visitors for the next 24 hours to continue inspecting the area. A larger-scale operation was launched, involving many more law enforcement officers, and results came quickly. They were able to find broken parts of a mobile phone, which had been disassembled and scattered around the area. Over the next few days, the communication device was collected and completely restored. Meanwhile, the forensic expert performed an autopsy on the body, revealing that the girl had been brutally tortured before her death. Her throat had been cut twice, but that was not the cause of her death. She had received several stab wounds from an object similar to a knife, one of which had pierced her liver and caused fatal bleeding. Without emergency assistance, a cut throat could also have killed her. There were signs of prolonged strangulation on her face, which complicated the determination of exactly what had occurred. According to the forensic expert, the strangulation may have involved something like a long piece of fabric. Simultaneously, several officers visited the school indicated on the girl's T-shirt to identify any missing high school girls. At the school, the police talked to the principal and teachers, showed them photographs of the unidentified victim. The girl was recognized. Her name was Caitlin Root. She had studied there for some time before switching to homeschool. Caitlin was born on November 11, 1998, into a large family with 5 sisters and 5 brothers. She was very positive, artistic, and funny, and loved singing, dancing, walking in the fresh air. Her last hobby was hunting for Pokemon in the park, which was very popular at the time. It was unclear what attracted her to Krug Park, located in another area of the city that was less known to her. It was beautiful and quiet, a favorite place for many runners until this tragedy occurred. However, there were some remote and gloomy spots where locals rarely ventured. That is where Caitlin's body was discovered. At school, Caitlin's close friends were devastated by her loss, and they willingly cooperated with the investigation. When the Root family was informed that the body of their missing daughter had been found, everyone was heartbroken. They desperately wanted to find who had so cruelly taken the life of a girl just 3 weeks shy of her 18th birthday. Despite her close relationship with the family, at the time of the incident, Caitlin did not live with them. She had grown up and wanted more independence, freedom, so she was temporarily staying with her best friend, who lived with her grandmother. The whole group had to maintain constant contact, but nothing suspicious was noticed. The police visited this house to speak with all its residents. In fact, the family with whom Caitlin was living at the time noticed her disappearance and contacted the police. Upon identification, the police talked to Caitlin's friend's family and finally received the first valuable clue. According to Caitlin's friend's mother, a few days before the crime, Caitlin had an online argument with her boyfriend. She was planning to break up with him, but the situation escalated into a big fight. The woman reported that their last meeting ended in a confrontation, after which Caitlin was left with a bruise. This mark was also found during the autopsy. All this gave the police their first suspect, whom they decided to interview. They were not able to find him right away, but several of Caitlin's boyfriend's friends responded. None of them believed that Caitlin's boyfriend could physically harm Caitlin, as he was not prone to aggression or violence. No one had noticed anything like that about him before. However, the police wanted to speak with him in person. Witnesses were also found who reported seeing his car, which allegedly stopped near Krug Park late in the evening. All this strengthened the suspicion against him. Finally, the police met with Caitlin's boyfriend. The evidence of his involvement began to mount, as there were numerous marks on his body and arms, minor wounds resembling scratches. He attributed these to branches while riding a motorcycle. He stated that he met with Caitlin, and the last time they saw each other was on Thursday, a few days before the murder. On that day, a friend of his also joined them. Everything seemed fine, and according to him, Caitlin spent a lot of time with them, with no conflicts occurring. Therefore, he found it very unpleasant to receive a call 2 days after this meeting from an unknown person who accused him of beating women. This voice sounded threatening and offered to meet to confront him about what he had done to Caitlin. The caller then hung up. Caitlin's boyfriend didn't understand that there was a deeper implication behind this. Despite there being no conflicts between them, he was surprised when Caitlin later accused him of breaking her nose. After that, she hung up and ignored his calls. He considered any accusations of aggression and cruelty, especially towards his girlfriend, to be absurd. Afterward, Caitlin's boyfriend published several posts on his social media, suggesting that Caitlin had convinced her friends to turn against him. He couldn't understand the reasons behind it but felt he didn't have time to figure out the details. Notably, he provided an alibi for almost the entire Saturday and Sunday, having visited several friends, all of which were confirmed, leaving no time window sufficient for an attack. Despite the suspicion, nothing significant could be obtained against him, except for the name of another potential suspect. Caitlin's boyfriend told the detectives about Adam, who, according to Caitlin, had been literally obsessed with her. He behaved anxiously to such an extent that he began to stalk her, sending letters with ambiguous content and insinuating that he might take his own life if she didn't want to meet him. Before the crime, the police learned that Adam communicated with his best friend on social media on October 15th at around 8 p.m., which was the last time he contacted her. To the surprise of the police, this best friend turned out to be Caitlin. Adam had added her to his list of close friends, probably to avoid drawing attention to his unhealthy attraction to her. Before meeting with this new suspect, the detectives decided to gather more information about him and interviewed his closest acquaintances. They discovered that both Caitlin and Adam attended a party on the night of the murder and were supposed to spend time together. At the gathering, Adam was accompanied by a couple of friends, and there were witnesses who saw the whole group leave late in the evening, with Caitlin among them. Several attendees were confident that they all planned to go to Krug Park, where Caitlin's body was later found. It is noteworthy that they returned without Caitlin and told everyone that she had left with an unknown group of people, which seemed strange, uncharacteristic of her. Upon checking Adam's social media profiles, it turned out that the day after the murder, he began posting peculiar messages. While he did not specifically mention what he had done, he clearly expressed regret for some action. However, when interrogated, he He insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime and that the post referred to something entirely different. Instead, he recounted his version of events. According to Adam, when they left the party, Caitlin received a message from a friend named Amanda. After exchanging several short messages, they agreed to meet at Krug Park. Adam stated that he had warned Caitlin that it was a bad idea to meet anyone at such a late hour, especially in a park he barely knew, but she didn't heed his advice and left. Adam claimed that he was just friends with Caitlin, had no conflicts with her, countering the allegations of stalking and obsession, which he also considered absurd. He showed the detectives the correspondence, where they found nothing incriminating. By Adam's own admission, the allegations of obsession with Caitlin were clearly fabricated. He explained that the last time he saw her was not far from the place where they had spent time with friends, and she got into an SUV, which she was probably picked up in by Amanda. Adam himself saw this car for the first time, did not know who it belonged to, he couldn't recognize it, nor could the other participants at the meeting. He insisted that he believed Amanda was involved in what happened to Caitlin. Interestingly, his account was immediately confirmed by several witnesses among the young people who were at that meeting. They also saw how Caitlin got into an unknown Santa Fe SUV while Adam stayed with them. Adam appeared extremely upset and even went to the family of the deceased to express his condolences. Everyone believed that he sincerely mourned this loss and willingly helped the Root family cope with their grief, even assisting Caitlin's family during the funeral. Further investigation confirmed that she had indeed communicated with a girl named Amanda. When detectives spoke to the father of Caitlin, David Stevens, it turned out that David was well acquainted with all of his daughter's close friends. There weren't many of them, and Amanda was among them. According to him, their relationship was complicated. The teenagers were sometimes best friends and at other times fought and literally hated each other. It emerged that this girl was known to both Caitlin's best friend and her mother, both of whom considered Amanda a very unpleasant character who left mixed impressions. Consequently, the police became interested in Amanda and decided to meet with her. She was detained and ended up under interrogation. Amanda did not immediately disclose all the information they knew about the case. She even reported that Caitlin had disappeared rather than died. From the very beginning, Amanda acted as if she did not understand what was happening. According to her, she did not call Caitlin on that fateful evening, had not seen her. Amanda countering what Adam and his friends claimed. Their last conversation, she said, took place on Saturday afternoon. She even provided the police with her social media account so that investigators could verify her statements. She used the pseudonym Amanda Panda without any photos. Amanda continued to deny that she had communicated with or met her friend on Sunday and provided an alibi, stating that her neighbor could confirm she had spent the entire evening at home. The police checked this information, and the woman confirmed the alibi, reporting that she had repeatedly seen Amanda in the house throughout the evening, including at the approximate time of the attack. They had crossed paths and communicated several times, which ruled out her involvement in the crime. Amanda had no plans to go out anywhere and had been at home all evening in her loungewear. After this confirmation, the police were forced to let Amanda go. All possible leads were investigated, but they remained empty-handed. The investigation reached a dead end. Due to the many participants involved, the story became so confusing that it spiraled out of control. Then, the police accessed Caitlin's mobile phone in search of clues, allowing detectives to navigate the gallery and find a photo that was the last one taken before the brutal attack. There were no people in the image, but it included the facade of a store found in the city, about 5 kilometers from Caitlin's house. After obtaining access to the recordings from the store's CCTV cameras, they managed to find a car that matched the description of the SUV associated with the team. When this photo was taken near the store, a dark car pulled up, from which a limping man emerged. He bought snacks and immediately left. Unfortunately, this did not yield any clues, as the store employees did not remember anyone, and the image was too blurry. The police continued to study the mobile phone of Caitlin regarding the account named Amanda Dow. Correspondence from this page revealed that she had communicated with Caitlin on the evening of her murder. Between them, there was a short dialogue where the girls agreed to meet and smoke a joint. As it turned out, this account belonged to a girl named Amanda Bennett, The same Amanda who was now under scrutiny by the authorities and likely had several accounts on social media. She was a 17-year-old girl who, at the time, was in a serious relationship with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Sebastian Dowell. The police went to the address where Amanda and Sebastian lived. They immediately found a dark Santa Fe SUV that matched the description of the one captured on CCTV at the convenience store where Caitlin had filmed just before her death. There were enough clues to consider Amanda and Sebastian prime suspects. They were arrested, and while they provided an alibi, it took some time to verify it. It was decided to arrest them and also confiscate their vehicles, mobile phones for examination. Detectives questioned them separately. When they spoke to Amanda, they didn't disclose what they knew. They simply decided to restore the chronology of events starting from Friday, which was a clever move. In fact, the police were particularly interested in Saturday and Sunday. If Amanda remembered Friday well but suddenly could not recall anything from Sunday, it would appear suspicious. The police often use this technique during interrogations to break down criminals. Amanda detailed her Friday evening spent with her boyfriend and their 2-month-old child. Difficulties arose, however, when she was asked about Saturday. Suddenly, she claimed that she had actually confused the days, and the events she described occurred on Saturday. Meanwhile, Sebastian also struggled. He could not recall what he had been doing with his common-law wife in the past few days. His statements increasingly contradicted the story he had provided. Everything suggested that Amanda had prepared for her meeting with the police, but she became a little confused. Her boyfriend didn't have much time either. He couldn't even say anything about the movie they supposedly watched together at the cinema, despite Amanda describing it in detail. But they was never found on the CCTV footage. There were no tickets or any data confirming that they had been in the area over that weekend. Amanda's story remained uncorroborated. This suspicious couple was clearly lying to the police. When Sebastian was confronted with the obvious inconsistencies in their stories, he became nervous. After that, the police noticed there were some cuts on his hands. Sebastian said they were from a cat, however, he later changed his story and admitted that they might be from his knives. His collection contained numerous stabbing and cutting items. During the arrest and searches, several knives from Sebastian's collection were confiscated in hopes of finding blood on them. Later, the examination confirmed that there were particles of Caitlin's blood on one knife. During the conversation, it became evident that Sebastian was in a subordinate position in the relationship, which he confirmed by stating that Amanda controlled everything happening 100% and that he obeyed her. According to him, Amanda completely excluded strangers from their social circle. He didn't even have friends that he could choose on his own. In fact, his social interactions were restricted because Sebastian complained that he had to ask for permission for any of his desires. For example, he liked to smoke a joint, but he would only do so after getting Amanda's approval. She was jealous and rude. In fits of anger, she often beat Sebastian quite cruelly. Once, she even broke his ribs. Sebastian feared that Amanda would eventually kill him with a knife. Sebastian said that Amanda suffered from some mental disorders that would suddenly thrust her into this aggressive state shortly before the crime. They had gone to a psychotherapist, but all the doctor did was double the dosage of her medications. However, Sebastian was not entirely innocent either. His social media profile contained a lot of dark humor, as well as cruel and murderous imagery. It seemed he was obsessed with this topic. Despite the detectives not revealing the real reason for Amanda and Sebastian's arrest, it turned out that Sebastian was aware of the murder in the park. He insisted that he had heard about it on social media, but he had already been caught in a lie. The more nervous he became, the more his story changed. In the end, he admitted that he knew Caitlin quite well. They communicated frequently. He and Caitlin were good friends. Caitlin even visited them in the hospital to congratulate them on the birth of their child, during which she spoke warmly about him, touching Amanda, the new mother. From that moment on, indirect evidence began to surface, suggesting that the tragedy was provoked by Amanda's jealousy and erratic behavior. At first, Sebastian denied such assumptions, but later he confessed that Amanda had often expressed anger towards him when he exchanged compliments with Caitlin. He continued to deny any romantic connection between them, insisting that it was purely friendly communication, while also maintaining that he was not involved in any crime. One of their friends mentioned that Amanda had always been friendly, sociable, and positive. However, the situation changed dramatically after the birth of their child, which many attributed to postpartum depression. In addition, she believed that something more than just friendship had developed between Sebastian and Caitlin. Amanda frequently referred to Caitlin and was clearly angry, exhibiting intense jealousy towards her boyfriend. Judging by her friend's words, this turned into an obsession with getting rid of Caitlin. Moreover, Amanda was aware of many details about the crime that she could not have known by chance, as they had not been covered in the media. This discussion smoothly led to topics about their relationships and the birth of the child. Amanda's demeanor visibly changed when they began discussing Caitlin and Sebastian. This was clearly a sensitive subject for her, but she composed herself and did not reveal her emotions. It is curious that during the entire interrogation, Amanda did not show any regret or pity toward her friend. On the contrary, from the very beginning, she appeared in high spirits and giggled frequently. Considering the circumstances that had led Amanda to this situation, her behavior seemed unsettling. The true motive behind this case included records of demonic summonings. This confirmed that he was involved in all sorts of dark themes with his girlfriend, but he claimed that it was all part of a hobby and role, playing games, insisting that they did not take it too far or commit any crimes. However, there was confirmation that they planned the murder in stages. Even though the information was deleted, it was easily recoverable. This became the main incriminating evidence against both criminals. When both were informed about this evidence, they abruptly changed their tactics, refuting their earlier statements and beginning to blame each other. Judging by their correspondence and records found in the house, both criminals were charged with first-degree murder. Upon reviewing their dialogues, the frightening truth of this brutal massacre was revealed. The murder was indeed ritualistic. That evening, Amanda and Sebastian sent a message to 6 contacts from their list to lure one of the victims into a trap. They probably did not care who responded, but only Caitlin Root did, which ultimately sealed her fate. The jury was shocked by the senselessness of this act of violence, simultaneously remained confident that it was Amanda who initiated it and took the life of Caitlin with pleasure. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and Sebastian likely helped by holding Caitlin. On May 5, 2017, Sebastian Dowell was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder in the death of Caitlin Root. Just days later, on May 9, 2017, Amanda Bennett was sentenced to life in prison for the same crime, second-degree murder. Both are without the possibility of parole. Caitlin's family, while satisfied with the sentence, expressed deep sorrow over the loss of their daughter. Some people have great powers that help them solve complex problems regardless of age. For example, the main character in today's story, Tia Hernlin, was born in 2000. Her parents, Julie Hernlin and Aeneas Hernlin, were a couple of surfers with an adventurous spirit they loved for an active lifestyle. They were very close-knit young people who sincerely loved each other. Tia became the embodiment of their romantic feelings, further strengthened their family bond. They dedicated their favorite activities to their daughter, engaged her in sports, and maintained an active lifestyle, which contributed to both their family ties and Tia's spirit. Julie and Aeneas protected their child in every way possible. Tia was creative and active, following her parents' example. She enjoyed sports, loved interacting with children her own age. Tia also easily connected with the older generation, leaving everyone amazed at how mature she was for her age. She also adored animals, so the family welcomed a dog and 3 cats into their home. In 2005, 5-year-old Tia was still attending kindergarten but was preparing to start school the following year, an important and eagerly anticipated milestone for her. Meanwhile, her parents continued to work and build their careers. At 29 years old, Aeneas had begun a new chapter in his career as a manager at the organization where he had worked for many years. His wife, Julie, was planning to finish her studies soon. A few years prior, she had enrolled in law school at a community college in Daytona Beach, Florida, where they all lived. With just 2 months left before receiving her diploma, Julie was close to fulfilling her dream of practicing law. She intended to become a paralegal to gain the necessary experience and improve further in her field. It all seemed like the idyllic American dream, at least until March 28, 2005. On that early Monday morning, law enforcement officials received an alarming call. A child had contacted 911. At first, the coordinator thought it could be a joke or mistake, but continued to listen to her story. Tia mentioned finding blood in her parents' room and that her parents did not respond when she called for them. She saw her parents lying on the floor in blood and was afraid they were ill, perhaps even dead, so she asked for help. Despite her fear, Tia spoke calmly about the situation. The coordinator realized this was serious, so the police were dispatched immediately. While waiting for their arrival, the dispatcher engaged Tia in conversation, attempting to distract her from panic. The coordinator sought valuable information. Tia mentioned a possible robber, creating the risk that a stranger might still be in the house. However, Tia assured the operator that there were no guests expected that evening, explaining that she had been woken by strange noises, at least 2 bangs that sounded like gunshots. When she went to her parents' room, no one was there, and that was when she found their bodies. Tia immediately thought to call emergency services when she saw the suspicious red splashes. Fortunately, her parents had taught her how to dial 911, a quick action that could potentially save their lives. For a 5-year-old girl, she maintained an impressive level of calm. She informed the coordinator that, apart from her, there was a dog and 3 cats in the house. About 3 minutes after this exchange, the responding officers arrived outside the door. The coordinator informed Tia of this, and she opened the door for them. The police were astonished that the entire conversation had been held with a 5-year-old child who could provide such detailed and coherent information. Tia's calm demeanor ultimately contributed not only to her safety but also to the unfolding investigation. As it turned out, she had interpreted everything correctly. In the early morning hours, a stranger had entered their home. Tia pointed out where her parents' bedroom was. There, the police found the bodies of 2 victims. No weapons were found in the parents' bedroom, and it did not appear to be a case of voluntary end of life. 31-year-old Julie was killed on the spot, and it was already impossible to help her. Her husband, 29-year-old Aeneas, was still breathing, but his condition was critical. Paramedics arrived at the scene and took him to hospital after he was attacked in the head by a gun. Despite the doctor's desperate efforts to save him, he died the next day in a Daytona Beach hospital. Tia was left an orphan. The county sheriff held a press conference to inform the public about the attack and the brave little girl who had survived a real hell. The local community was worried about Tia, but for a 5-year-old, she appeared to be doing fairly well. Child psychologists worked with her, while detectives were in no hurry to talk to Tia about what had happened, as they were still analyzing the information they had collected and didn't want to further traumatize her. They were most concerned about the long-term consequences of the horror she had experienced. After all, at just 5 years old, Tia still didn't fully understand what had happened. In any case, her handling of the situation was impressive and garnered a significant response from the local community. The reaction to the press conference was quite controversial. On one hand, the 5-year-old girl was able to pull herself together, call the police, and meet the patrolman in the house while caring for her injured parents. On the other hand, people were outraged at how this situation could have happened. It was remarkable that Tia managed to provide all the necessary information during the call and remain composed. She communicated with the coordinator and practically did not panic. The actions of the coordinator were also highly praised. In an attempt to understand what happened in the house, detectives launched an investigation to quickly find the criminal and ensure safety on the streets. Additionally, it was believed that Tia could be in danger while the criminal was at large. The motive behind the attack was unclear. It was possible that he could return for her. The bedroom where Tia's parents died was carefully examined, and a cartridge case was found there. They were apparently sleeping and were shot at close range. They had not even had the time to react. Signs of a break-in were found in the house, leading the authorities to initially consider the case as a robbery gone wrong. However, this assumption was quickly refuted, as nothing was missing from the Hernland family home, and the victims died in the same positions in which they had been sleeping. This meant that they had not had time to catch the criminal off guard, which forced him to kill them. It seemed that the assailant's only target was, in fact, Julie and Aeneas. Immediately after shooting both of them, he simply left the house. It was evident that this attack was very personal, so detectives began assessing the immediate circle of the victims to see who might have hated them enough to want them dead. The Hernlands seemed like nice, friendly people who avoided conflict. They were athletes, had no banned substance addictions, and did not abuse alcohol, drinking only occasionally on holidays. Aeneas and Julie had never been known to have any criminal connections, aside from a few traffic fines, and they had no problems with the law. This only made the search more challenging. Detectives went from neighbor to neighbor, interviewing local residents in the hope that someone could provide valuable clues. Those close to the victim spoke of a suspicious neighbor who lived nearby. Both had repeatedly complained about issues with this man. It was David Edward Johnson, a 33-year-old man who, according to several witnesses, had a very erratic temperament. At an early stage of the investigation, no one could provide any specific information about his behavior, so the police decided to talk to him personally. However, when they knocked on his door, he did not answer. There was no evidence against him at that time, and at least a search or arrest warrant would have been needed, which they did not yet have. Consequently, the police were forced to leave empty-handed but decided to investigate this man further while he was still potentially on the run. As it turned out, David had repeatedly had run-ins with the law. However, until that point, there had been no violent incidents. His convictions were minor and related to banned substance use and possession, although more disturbing details emerged. Investigators found that shortly before the tragedy, the Hernlands had tried to obtain a restraining order against their neighbor. This occurred back in January, 3 months before the double murder, when Julie went to court due to David's alarming behavior. In particular, on the day before the hearing, David drove past their house and shouted several threats at them. While the police were trying to determine any connection between these events, David Johnson was found in his home with no signs of life. When the police arrived in the area, they discovered him dead from a single gunshot wound to the head, with a gun lying next to him. The approximate time of death was determined to be the same day. He had taken his own life within a few hours of Aeneas and Julie's murder. This is why he did not open the door to the detective when he first visited the house. Ballistics tests were conducted, confirming that Aeneas, Julie, and David were attacked with the same gun, the same pistol that was found in David's house. Evidence indicated that the main suspect, having disputes with his neighbors, had taken his own life. After finding David's body, forensic experts conducted a thorough examination. Detectives hoped to find clues that would help them understand what led to this tragic outcome and the simultaneous deaths of 3 individuals. The most disturbing evidence that the police managed to find was a collection of newspaper clippings related to an arrest in November. They were pinned to the refrigerator door, and, in addition, documents related to the trial were lying in plain sight. It was discovered that all of this was connected to the same episode. It is likely that David blamed his neighbors, the Hernland family, for his troubles. Hatred and paranoia were evident in David's behavior. Everyone who knew him well was aware that he regularly used banned substances. A toxicological examination was conducted, which confirmed that at the time of the crime, he was in a state of severe intoxication from illegal substances, apparently using them to suppress feelings of fear or, conversely, falling into paranoid delirium due to their use, which ultimately led him to take up arms. Unfortunately, it was not possible to reliably ascertain the motive for the attack since there was no suicide note in the house. Consequently, the detectives delved deeper into matters related to the restraining order. Now, they needed to understand what could have made David harbor such intense hatred for his neighbors, who appeared to be a nice, harmless couple. It was found that David Johnson had encountered further legal troubles. The police raided his house and discovered several bushes of illegal plants. He had converted his basement into a makeshift garden for growing marijuana. Following this incident, he began experiencing more problems with the law. The police sought to determine whether these issues could be connected to the double murder, so they interviewed David's closest associates. Several friends, including individuals connected to the criminal world, provided a crucial insight. David blamed his neighbors for reporting him to law enforcement. There was no reason to accept this claim, as Julie and her husband had never visited his house to see the illegal plants. However, David was convinced that the Hernlands had instigated his troubles. Detectives investigated this statement, leading to a search at his address. However, the findings did not corroborate David's assumptions. The Hernlands were truly uninvolved, the caller was someone else entirely, and the plants that had been discovered in David's home were found purely by accident. No one was actively seeking to find them. In November 2004, a report was received by the police regarding a burglary at a neighboring house. David was investigated since he had previously had legal issues. They merely wanted to check his involvement. During a search of his residence, illegal plants and steroids were discovered accidentally. It seemed David was not making much effort to hide them, and one of the officers simply caught a distinct smell. David's hatred and suspicion towards Aeneas and Julie were entirely unfounded. However, this erroneous belief became the catalyst for a future tragedy. Due to his delusions, David developed a deep-seated animosity towards they, rendering him fixated on seeking revenge. That is why he began threatening Aeneas and Julie. David did not articulate a coherent reason for his animosity. Instead, he began to harass the neighbors. He repeatedly approached Aeneas and Julie on the street, accusing them of stalking him, a claim that bewildered they, as they were not persecuting him. Although they had genuine concerns regarding his potential ties to crime and banned substance use, they chose not to involve the police, believing it was none of their business. Julie often spoke to her friends and family about David's odd behavior. As the tragedy approached, these conversations became increasingly frequent. Julie felt immense pressure and fear. By December 2004, she began documenting all the incidents in her diary, noting the date, time, and detailed descriptions of her neighbors' behavior. By January of the following year, these threats had escalated to a continuous pattern, causing serious concern for the Hernland family. David began to appear near the Hernland family's home with increasing frequency, despite the fact that it was situated in a dead-end street, and he had no legitimate reason to be there. His actions grew more intrusive and frightened the Hernland family, leading to dozens of entries detailing his disturbing behavior. Julie regarded these as strong evidence that would convince a judge of David's dangerousness and justify her request for a restraining order. They had exhausted their patience and were genuinely frightened, prompting Julie to turn to the courts. Unfortunately for them, the judge presiding over the case rejected the motion, concluding that no violence had occurred on David's part. He had not physically attacked them but limited himself to verbal threats. It was impossible to prove the fact of persecution based on the accusations and evidence provided. Julie returned home empty-handed, without a restraining order. Only the sheriff did not stand aside. He spoke to David, warning that if he did not back down, Hernland's repeated statements could lead to something more serious. The refusal to issue a restraining order caused real despair for Julie. She was considering changing her place of residence, but that would take time. She turned to her friend Michelle on the very day she learned of the verdict. Julie was so frightened by her neighbor's behavior that she told Michelle that if something happened to her, only David could be to blame. Her friend tried to calm her down in every possible way, but her words proved to be prophetic. She had only a week left to live, as did her husband. David was notified of the neighbors' attempts to obtain a restraining order, which only confirmed his delusion that they held a grudge against him and wanted to put him behind bars. Probably from that moment on, a murder plan began to form in his mind, which he later executed. During a press conference, the sheriff confirmed that the neighbors' conflict had indeed taken place. Tensions were rising, however, no one expected David to take up arms. There were no obvious prerequisites or serious quarrels, so everything died down until that fateful night. The authorities concluded that an unfortunate combination of circumstances, abuse of a prohibited drug, and emotional stress had driven David to madness. Once again, having used the prohibited drug, he decided to eliminate the people he considered a threat to his freedom. Fortunately, he did not intend to kill the child, but perhaps he simply forgot about her presence in the house. He left quickly and did not come face to face with Tia. It is difficult to say how this tragedy would have ended if the 5-year-old girl had immediately left her room upon waking up just a few minutes after the shots were fired. Upon returning home, David sobered up a little and likely realized the full gravity of the crime he had committed. Perhaps he was afraid that the police, who arrived in response to the call, would find him, leading him to decide to take his own life. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, David lost control of his emotions and attacked himself in the head. It all seemed like a monstrous act of cruelty fueled by the delusions and addictions of a criminal. The killer was found, and the case was closed. However, this was just the beginning for Tia, a brave little girl who witnessed her parents being attacked but did not lose her composure and called for help. In the wake of the tragedy and the helplessness of the judicial system, the public revolted. Citizens across the nation learned about this terrible incident that could have been prevented and once again questioned the effectiveness of the protection system and the authorities' powerlessness. Numerous proposals emerged to improve the system, emphasizing a need for stricter punishments. Even the fact that the criminal had voluntarily taken his own life and no longer posed a threat to society did not soothe the local population. People began to doubt the effectiveness of the laws. Concerned citizens and lawyers joined in. Journalists eagerly fanned the flames of the controversy. Many experts participated in discussions about what happened, but these conversations did not lead to any concrete actions. The fate of Tia became a pressing issue. People worried about what would happen to her next, and many offered to take her into their families. Tia found solace among relatives. After the tragedy and her communication with the authorities, she was taken in by her grandparents, who lived in Central Florida. She received words of support from the entire local community and became a sort of celebrity despite her young age. People did not want to limit themselves to just words, understanding that Tia might face financial difficulties in the future. Without parental support, her elderly grandparents could no longer provide everything she needed, especially in education. Although her relatives did not ask for financial assistance, compassionate individuals took the initiative to create a trust fund in her name. The extensive media coverage of this tragedy helped attract attention and gather much-needed resources. Furthermore, Tia would be able to receive funds upon reaching adulthood. However, even this was not what allowed Tia to survive the loss of her loved ones. It was her strength of character. Now an adult, Tia sincerely believes that her resilience was possible only thanks to the efforts of her mother and father. She recalled that terrible night very well, as it caused her significant psychological trauma. During their short lives, her parents instilled in her a sense of purpose and a strong character that she managed to demonstrate even at such a young age. This influenced her entire life. Having overcome early difficulties, Tia focused on her studies. During her school years, Tia became a local celebrity but remained modest and did not abuse her popularity. She was interested not only in sports but also in painting and music, which highlighted her creative nature. Moreover, Tia concentrated on academic success, as she dreamed of fulfilling her mother's ambition of becoming a lawyer and helping others. All her teachers spoke of her as a promising child with a great future. School psychologists also worked with her and paid her a little more attention than other children, which was understandable. The transitional period caused the greatest concern, as the traumas she experienced in childhood could manifest in unpredictable ways. But even during this time, Tia remained focused on her studies. She drew and played the guitar. Instead of becoming an unpredictable rebel, she found a new direction and began to help her community. Gradually, her efforts grew into volunteer activities. Tia was very grateful to those who supported her after the tragic loss of her family. Now Tia is 25 years old. She has received a college education and volunteers for several large charities. For these purposes, Tia has begun using social media. Instead of promoting herself, she focuses on supporting others. She shares advice with people who have experienced serious tragedies, helping them cope. She has become an example of courage and selflessness for many, wanting to thank society for its help. She frequently shares her story to exemplify resilience, proving that any difficulties can be overcome. Currently, Tia is quite private and avoids unnecessary attention. In her youth, she attracted media interest, participated in interviews, and often served as an example of the strength of spirit that a person can show. Now, however, she values confidentiality, aware that excessive attention can attract unwanted people into her life. Tia is now a young woman who plans to start a family of her own and hopes to avoid meeting people like David Johnson. In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time, and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jesse and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jesse and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, he found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and call for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. She was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, while he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones, who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, he was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, he gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye and secretly follows her to a deserted street where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed: Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be cancelled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horror she had endured.